Okay, so in this video, we're now going to just run through a standard RDL variation or a conventional RDL. You've probably already seen on the YouTube channel, we have a snatch grip RDL variation. So essentially to differentiate the two, a snatch grip, all it is we just have a wider hand stance or grip. And then with this one, the standard RDL, we're going to have more of that generic hand grip position, which is going to be relatively shoulder width apart. Okay, so very plain and simple in terms of the actual execution of this movement. Now, just a caveat to add here, when we're looking at movements like this, so like an RDL, a deadlift, a squat, these are multiple joint, multiple musculature movements. So although obviously the predominant or primary muscles that we're targeting in this RDL variation is going to be through the glutes, to be specific, the gluteus maximus, and then also the hamstring muscles, there are going to be other auxiliary muscles that are going to come into play. So these are the assisting antagonist muscles that are going to have to play some kind of role, whether that's to help with joint integrity, to keep things in place, or provide support to that primary muscle. So why I've mentioned this is because although we know that, let's say with an RDL, we're predominantly targeting those primary muscles being the glutes and the hamstrings, if you do feel a little bit of quad involvement, if you do feel a little bit of calf involvement, your lower back, upper traps, biceps, triceps to a degree, then that's absolutely fine. But essentially we want most of that stimulation coming through the actual glutes and hamstrings themselves. Okay, so there's just something to add in there so that everybody understands that you can't just completely isolate one particular muscle. Other muscles have to play a role. It might not necessarily be in executing that movement. So for example, with an RDL, we're creating obviously hip extension. We also have to create hip flexion, which means that there's going to be some involvement of the quad muscles, in particular the rectus femoris. Or obviously when we're looking at knee flexion, knee extension, there's going to be some involvement of the calves, the gastroc, and again, like through the spine, there's going to be some muscles around the back and around the top that's going to have to create stability. Okay, so just bear that in mind when it comes to any kind of compound movement. So kind of a bit of a digression there, but getting back onto the topic for you guys. So in terms of the actual execution of the RDL, plain and simple, most of it has been explained on that snatch grip RDL variation. So all we're going to do is essentially, in terms of our hand position, like I said, we want that generic position of around about shoulder width. And obviously bear in mind that that is going to be, it's going to vary from one person to the next person. Some people have a relatively narrow shoulder width, other people have wider shoulder widths. Okay, so just because my stance might be here, so my hand position might be here, your hand position might be there, it might be out here. Obviously it's all relative to you and your shoulder width. So what we're going to do is we're going to unrack, and then initially we're going to initiate through hip flexion. So we're driving the hips back like so. And then as we get towards the bottom, as we're reaching that limited range of hamstring lengthening, the knees are going to come into play and go into knee flexion to a degree, like just a small amount, and then we're going to drive back into hip extension. So initiating through hip flexion, like so, and then as we get to the bottom, as you can see, a little bit of knee flexion, and then from here, we're transitioning in to hip extension. So our internal cue is pushing our hips forward towards the wall in front of me. Okay, so as opposed to getting to here and then just thinking, right, just pulling up with my back, I'm thinking about driving my hips forward. So without the bar, we're going to come back like so, we're going to pause at the bottom. Now from here, I'm thinking about contracting my glutes, the gluteus maximus, and that's going to create that hip extension. And then I go again, back out, hip flexion, and then up like so. So essentially this is predominantly a hip and knee joint movement, not spinal flexion and extension.